BamaInsider senior recruiting analyst Andrew Bone, part of the Rivals.com network, joins us weekly for the Alabama Football Recruiting Report. Bone, the big news the last couple of days is five-star Columbia, South Carolina Hammond School strong side defensive end Jordan Burch has set his commitment date for December 19th, the second day of the early signing period. And this is a guy that all the top programs around the country have recruited. Alabama is in the mix. He set the date. Now, can you give us some insight on where you think he's going to go?
Well, as we talked about throughout the entire year on Jordan Burch, it's been kind of a mystery as to what he's going to do, because he doesn't talk about any of his official visits. He doesn't talk about any visits. I mean, he just keeps things extremely quiet regarding his recruitment. And he visited Alabama a couple weekends ago, and we haven't really had an opportunity to really put much out there about his trip. I don't think anybody's been able to, and he just keeps things extremely quiet. Now, just from talking to different people, talking to different sources, and you try to reach out to different people on every different side. I mean, because you talk to people that covered Georgia or Clemson or LSU or South Carolina or and Alabama, obviously, and kind of get their feel on where things stand. And it certainly seems like it's a Clemson, Georgia, maybe even LSU battle. I mean, we've really started to hear LSU a lot more with different recruits over the course of the last month and a half. LSU hadn't really been a program, and how some of these kids list. Eric Gilbert, no one really expected him to go to LSU, and now Jordan Burch. There's a lot of talk about LSU, so he took a visit down there probably maybe about a month ago, and that's when things kind of changed for him in terms of his interest with LSU. But at the same time, a lot of people don't think he's going to leave far from home, that he's going to stay a little bit closer, and that kind of bodes well for it would bode well for South Carolina in most situations, but since he's right there in Columbia. But I think if he were to stay closer to home, I think Clemson, maybe Georgia. Athens is only about 2.5 hours away from Columbia, so could easily see him there. Do I think he's going to end up at Alabama? Probably not. I think Alabama's probably on the outside for him.
Okay, Philip Webb is an outside linebacker prospect that Alabama has been heavily involved with out of Beaufort, Georgia, for a long time. And this is another guy that LSU has made a strong move on. There's all types of stories out there that he jumped over the fence at Bryant-Denny and celebrated with LSU players on the field following the Tigers' win over the Crimson Tide, and that he's a lock for LSU. But then I'm hearing on some other from some other folks that he is going to visit Alabama again. So can you clear it up with Philip Webb, and what's the latest with him?
Well, I think a visit up to back to Alabama before making a decision is still kind of up in the air. I don't think he's officially set anything up, but I think there is some communication there. Alabama's still working on him, still trying to get him back on campus at least one more time, because he was in Tuscaloosa for an unofficial visit for that LSU game, and obviously two programs that he's extremely high on, and I think heading into the visit, LSU was the favorite. So, if he were to jump the fence, I don't know if he jumped the fence and celebrated with LSU or not, but I could certainly see him being excited if when LSU won, if LSU was is in fact the leader for him. But I think with Alabama, biggest thing with them is just trying to get him back on campus. If they can get him back on campus, spend some individual time with him, for an official visit, get a lot of face time with Coach Saban. They really press, how much they need him. I mean, they really love Philip Webb a lot. They think he's an elite player. Are they necessarily recruiting, somebody as a replacement for him? No. I think if they miss out on him, they're pretty much done at outside linebacker. The jack linebacker position, I think they'd be pretty much, finished. I just don't see them, trying to go after somebody else that they miss on him. So he's just kind of one of those elite players that they don't want to miss on. And obviously, they don't want to. They definitely don't want him to go to another SEC West program.
As far as LSU is concerned, and they've always recruited well. Let's be clear on that. It's not like that they haven't gotten good football players, but they put together this unbelievable season under Coach O. They've knocked off Alabama, which has been something they haven't done in 8 years. And this wave of momentum that they're riding in recruiting is Alabama-like. It's Clemson-like. It's Georgia-like. Again, I'm not saying they've come out of nowhere, but at this level, with the players that they're involved with, usually they do really well in Louisiana, really well in Texas, have certainly dipped into Georgia some, but they're going wherever they want this year and seem to be having an awesome amount of recruiting success. In your opinion, Bone, is it Coach O? Is it the season they're having? Is it Joe Brady, Joe Burrow? This newfound national interest in LSU, where has it come from?
Well, I mean, obviously LSU's always been a top recruiting program, but we started to see them, as you mentioned, go outside their typical territory where they've been able to land top recruits because they've dominated the state of Louisiana. Obviously, Alabama, get some good players from the state of Louisiana, just about every single year. But for the most part, LSU's really been able to keep most of those top guys at home. But this year, not only are they keeping the guys at home, they're able to go to different parts of the country. I mean, obviously, hitting the state of Georgia and getting Eric Gilbert and Hunter Johnson, their quarterback commitment. They've got a big they've got a big commitment from the state of excuse me, I'm having a brain fart this morning. Washington, I typically don't do this, but Washington D.C. and they're able to get Raheem Jarrett, 5-star wide receiver, Antoine Sampah, who's a 5-star linebacker from Woodbridge High School in Virginia. Elias Ricks, the number 1 cornerback in the country out of IMG Academy, and I mean it's been a pretty impressive run at guys that they've been able to get in this recruiting class, and now guys that they're starting to be kind of perceived as the favorite for, whether that's Zach Evans, the top running back in the country out of Houston. You've got obviously, like we just said, Philip Webb, maybe even Jordan Burch. I mean, it's a pretty incredible run, and it kind of started before the season. I mean, a lot of those guys committed to LSU before the season, but we've seen some guys go down there this season who probably weren't leaning towards LSU, and then they make their official visit down there, and they come back and they become the perceived favorite. So we'll see what happens, but I think definitely the season helps out, but a lot of these kids kind of getting down there for maybe for a first time or a second time, really just falling in love with it.
Let's get back to Alabama. We know tight end is a recruiting priority. They missed out on Eric Gilbert, who did commit to LSU. They're certainly involved still with Darnell Washington, trying to make a push there out of the big 6'7", 255-pound tight end out of Las Vegas. But I want to ask you about Jeremiah Pegues out of nearby Oxford, Mississippi. 6'3", 270 pounds. You're saying that he's coming back to Alabama again this weekend. So it looks like the Tide's really turned up the heat on Pegues.
Yeah, I think there's some interest there. In terms of, could he pick up the phone right now and call and say, hey, I'm ready to commit? I'm not necessarily sure that's the case, but I do think there is some interest there. And as we've talked about from the beginning of this recruiting cycle, tight end is such a very important position for Alabama in this class. And they missed on their biggest target in Eric Gilbert a few weeks ago, and very surprising for Alabama, and I'm sure most of the country. But as Eric ends up committing to LSU, but I do think that he's pretty solid. I don't see that changing at all. But they've kind of focused on Darnell Washington, another 5-star tight end that they've recruited, obviously since the beginning of his recruitment as well. But I would say it kind of slowed down a little bit, maybe early in the fall when, things were looking like Eric Gilbert was going to jump on board, and now, really started to pick it back up with Piggins. He's probably more of a backup plan right now, but you bring him in for an official visit, kind of see, where things go from there, and he might have a spot in the class down the road, but maybe not. I think they're going to kind of size him up this weekend, spend some time with him, kind of figure out what all they like about him off the field, because they know what they like about him on the field, or they wouldn't be bringing him in, for an official visit or recruiting him. So, there's definitely some interest there, and we'll kind of see where things go from there.
Running back is a position still of interest, even though Alabama has two really good commitments with Roydell Williams from Hueytown and Kyle Edwards from Destrehan, Louisiana. There continues to be speculation that Alabama will take a third back in this class. I'm not so sure, Bone. I just think, it's almost a certainty now that Brian Robinson will have to come back for a senior season. Trey Sanders will be coming off of injury. I do think Najee's probably going to go to the draft, but I look at the numbers, and I look at these two guys that they've got committed, which I think are winning football players. Now, granted, if one of these top 5-star guys wanted to commit to Alabama, I'm sure they'd take him, but where do you stand in terms of running back recruiting now? I think Alabama might be done there unless again, one of the top guys in the country says he wants to commit.
Yeah, I've been saying it the last couple of weeks on our recruiting board on BamaInsider.com that I think that Alabama could be done at the running back position. And I, like you said, Brian Robinson probably heading into this season, I think most people thought that there was a chance that he would leave early, depending on his junior season. And I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. I think there's a good chance that he comes back for his senior season and improves his draft stock. And, I don't think it's necessarily a priority anymore. We saw, back in the probably early fall, late August, that Alabama started really looking around for an additional running back. Not necessarily, guys like Zach Evans or Jace McClellan, who they've been recruiting for a long time. But obviously they extended an offer to Jahmyr Gibbs, who's committed to Georgia Tech. He's come over to Tuscaloosa a couple times, so there's some interest there in him. But getting a third running back, not necessarily a top priority right now. Now, if Zach Evans, Jace McCullough wanted to commit, I think Alabama would definitely consider that and leave those options on the table. But in terms of really pressing, for somebody else, I just don't see it happening right now. I think they're pretty happy with the guys that are committed, and I don't think either one of those guys you have to worry about. I think both of them are very solid commitments to Alabama. So if Zach Evans were to go elsewhere, in terms of if he doesn't go to LSU, we might see a push from LSU for Kyle Edwards, but I think he's pretty solid regardless. With Alabama, I don't see him flipping if LSU were to get on him kind of late. I think he's pretty solid, but we'll see what happens with Evans. I think Jason McClellan's pretty solid with Oklahoma. I just don't see him flipping at all. It would be really surprised if that happened, but and then with Zach Evans, as we've talked about throughout the whole year, very unpredictable. He's still uncommitted. So Nick Saban, Alabama, still recruiting him. We'll do an in-home visit with him, but right at this time, I would probably be a little surprised if he ended up at Alabama.
A few more minutes with Andrew Bone from BamaInsider.com, the Bama Football Recruiting Report. Tua's injury, just awful for everybody. He's such a high-profile player, a player of national interest. In terms of recruiting, does that impact recruiting at all when you have a top guy go down like that, a player that high school players look up to, or maybe other schools might use the rumor mill to say, well, Tua will come back to Alabama now? Does that impact Bryce Young? Does having a great player like that go down to injury, does it impact recruiting at all, Bone?
I don't think it will. I think even if he were to come back, next year, I don't see that happening. But if he were to come back, I think Bryce Young would look at it as an opportunity to, learn and develop and work under Tua for a year. That's kind of how I see it. I think Bryce is 100% on board with Alabama, regardless of the situation. I think he's extremely happy, and every time I talk to him, I mean, he just can't wait to get to Alabama. More excited about Alabama than just about any recruit I've ever talked to. So, I don't think it's going to really affect Bryce's recruitment. Now, could it affect somebody, else? Not necessarily Tua, but any big player. Could that affect somebody else? Yeah, absolutely. It potentially could, but in this situation, I don't see it having any effect.
I want to ask you about a 2021 recruit from here in the state, Lee Hunter, big defensive tackle out of great program there at Blunt in Pritchard. He named his top 12 recently. I've heard from a lot of folks that Auburn is the school to beat here, but Alabama, LSU, Kentucky, Georgia, Tennessee, Clemson, Ole Miss, Florida, Oregon, A&M, Carolina, they all make his 12 list. Where's Bama stand with him?
Well, I think they probably got a little bit of ground to make up with for him. Just they offered late. Alabama offered him, this season. I think it was late October when they finally extended him an offer. And he's had all these other offers for a long time, and he's visited other schools, but he's visited Alabama a couple times this year, and there's definitely some interest there. Obviously, Alabama's ability to develop defensive linemen, especially defensive linemen in state. Just so many players from the state of Alabama have gone on to the NFL, but I think that really sticks out to him. But a long way to go probably with his recruitment. I do think Auburn's in the driver's seat at this time, but you never know where things may stand. This time next year, or even 3 months from now. Once the season ends, junior days start, spring visits start, summer camps and stuff like that. Things usually completely change in a prospect's recruitment. So we'll see where things go. But Alabama's recruiting him, and there's a couple really good in-state defensive linemen next year with him and Tim Keenan from Ramsey High School in Birmingham.
One other player I'm going to ask you about before we get to Commitment Watch is you've written about him on BamaInsider.com, Ronald Williams, the junior college defensive back, but he's in the class of 2020. It looks like Alabama's really ramped it up with him.
Yes, they have. Alabama extended Ronald Williams a offer last month. He's from Hutchinson Community College in Kansas, and I think he's the top defensive back on Alabama's recruiting board. I think they're going all in on him. They really would like to get him as a part of this recruiting class, and they're really trying to get one more cornerback in this class. I don't know if they're going to get two, but I think that they're definitely want to get one more, and they're bringing Ronald Williams in this weekend for an official visit. So that's going to be a big visit for him. I think they'll roll out the red carpet for him and really pressure his probably pressure his commitment this weekend, because there's some other defensive backs that are out there that they're recruiting. So they would probably like to try to get an answer sooner rather than later, so they know if they need to press for somebody else. Because Ethan Pouncey, who just recently decommitted from Texas, he's supposed to come up to Alabama for an official sometime probably in early December. There's a few other guys that are out there, but really I think Ronald Williams is the top guy on their recruiting board, and they're going to get him on campus this weekend for an official.
All right, Commitment Watch. That's how we always like to wrap it up, Bone.
Well, that's who I'd watch for, Ronald Williams.
Okay.
He's definitely the name that I'm keeping an eye on for this upcoming weekend. Kind of see where things go, and as I mentioned earlier, JJ Piga is coming in for an official this weekend. Kind of not necessarily Commitment Watch, but just kind of just to have him on your watch list. Just kind of see where things go. Obviously, we'll have an update on where things stand in his recruitment after the weekend visit. We'll know a little bit more about whether or not Alabama's going to push for him or not.
All right, great stuff as always from Andrew Bone. Enlighten the listeners on how they can get all your great information.
Well, follow us at BamaInsider.com, part of the Rivals.com network. You can follow me on my Twitter handle at Andrew J. Bone, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, BamaInsider.com.
Great stuff, Bone. Appreciate it as always.
All right. Thanks, Gary.